There's a very recent trend, or maybe the last 5 years, of extremely violent online offending for fun. Perpetrators are often children. They do it for entertainment. Victims can be animals, people in vulnerable situations. This is a trend that really, when we discuss it, it makes me feel quite unwell. But it really is linked to this odd capacity of human beings to entertain themselves by causing harm to others, or just having no empathy. This is also a common stream among the offenders that we're looking at, is a lack of empathy for the people that they're harming.
In this episode, I speak to Elizabeth Wright from Interpol. Our conversation explores themes of a sexual nature, and while we approach them with care, they may be triggering for some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. This is the #NoExcuse podcast, discussing the challenges and complexities and potential solutions in preventing and responding to sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment in the aid sector, through interviews with victims and survivors, experts, aid workers, artists, and leaders. The podcast is produced by the World Health Organization's Department for the Prevention and Response to Sexual Misconduct. I am Guni Dias, your host and global focal point for the department. The woman I'm sitting with today works for one of the most powerful policing networks in the world, Interpol. When we think of Interpol, we think fighting fugitives and terrorism. But what we don't think about is sexual misconduct in the aid sector. But you'll be surprised. Today's guest is Elizabeth Wright, and she leads Project Soteria at Interpol. Welcome, Liz, to the #NoExcuse podcast.
Thank you, Guni. It's really great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Liz, how would you describe Interpol to someone who has never heard of it?
Interpol is a network of 196 member countries at the moment. That's a network that's growing all the time. And what we do is we connect police around the world. We collaborate with police all around the world for the prevention of crime and the response to crime. So we get involved in all kinds of different crime domains. We also support crises, either humanitarian incidents or accidents like plane crashes and things like this. And the main part of our work, the main focus of our work, is partnering with police agencies to try and make the world safer.
And people might, assume that you are a police, a cop, a policeman, a policewoman. How would you describe your job, and what is Project Soteria?
Yeah, I'm not a cop. I'm a civvy. So Interpol does have civilian as well as police staff. I'm working on a program called Soteria. I work with a really diverse team of experts in different areas. We have experts in protection, experts in corruption, and we're really focused on the prevention of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, with a focus for now on the aid and development sector. Maybe that will change and expand at one point, but the main goal right now is the prevention of SEA in this specific sector, and using the tools and the networks that Interpol has to try and address this issue. As much as Soteria is quite new, and we haven't worked with the aid sector in this particular way before, Interpol has been collaborating with UN entities since 2004 in a very similar way. So in fact, there was a General Assembly resolution in 2004 about working with international organizations to help keep them safer and keep harmful people out of international organizations. So that's something that has been operating for 15 years, and now we're trying to expand it to the NGO private sector. Anyone that's working in close proximity to people in quite vulnerable situations, bearing in mind that it's proximity and access that allows opportunity to offend. So it's Soteria is new in many ways, but it's also an expansion of work we've been conducting for 20 years.
So let's take a step back and understand the patterns of offenses when we talk about sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. You mentioned during our interview preparation that most sex offenders don't look like sex offenders, and they are very often repeat offenders. What patterns do you notice, and how can these insights help organizations, investigations to prevent or to better do their investigations?
It's difficult to say. You can't really say what a sex offender looks like. They look like anything, like anybody. Sex offending is actually quite wide. It is very underreported. I would say really we're still talking about, especially in this particular sector, predominantly men, but there are women offenders too, in different, they're playing different roles in different types of offending. In terms of patterns of behavior, it's, again, they use very many different patterns of behavior, but I would say once an offender finds a modus operandi that's successful, that works for them, then they will repeat that modus operandi over and over again, unless they're stopped by some kind of intervention. I mean, we've already talked about repeat offending, and many, many sex offenders are. So it's really convenient for them, even just being dismissed. The fact that people don't go to police very often, and there's this whole lack of accountability, it works very well for them. The other part that's very, very convenient is, and it's unfortunately, it's a bias that many of us have, is victim shaming. Many offenders are extremely manipulative, and maybe sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly, but they will manipulate in many, many cases their victims to believe that they initiated the whole process. Even when we're talking about a child, the child will believe that they came and they demanded the offended, or if they wanted a reward or they wanted something, so they encourage the whole thing, the whole scenario to take place. And this works very well for offenders, because also if the victim, be they adults or children, are in any way shamed, they're not willing to talk about it, or they talk about it to someone and it's brushed off, this just allows the offending to continue. So there are many, many different elements. And again, I speak about this not as a police investigator, but just someone who works and is quite exposed to this domain. But yeah, it's all these different conveniences are part of what allows offending to go on and the harm to continue.
In the aid sector, there is a history of international aid workers who have caused harm or perpetrated sexual offenses. And there's this history of them moving across borders and organizations. They're being unnoticed by their past actions. What are some of the measures that organizations can take as well to, tackle this?
I think when we talk about this issue, I think it's still really important to state that the sector is obviously very, very big. It's very, very diverse. And we are still talking about a few specific individuals. However, those individuals, through their behavior, can cause immense harm. And the harm is at different levels. It's at the individual level, it's at the community level. And of course, it's the harm to the organizations themselves and the efforts that they're engaged in, and whatever it may be in the context of their work. I think it's important to state also that this is not just international people causing offence, although of course that does happen. People can commit offences in their own jurisdictions, in their own communities. And Soteria, although Interpol is traditionally very focused on international crime, we are looking within Soteria at local as well as international offending. And there's lots of reasons for that. Well, we do have tools to help identify people when they cross borders, people who are known or of interest to Interpol for whatever reason. We also have a mandate to support police in the work that they do, so to help them deliver their own mandate to protect their own communities. So that's where we might step in when there's local offending, either to work with police to help them deal with cases in a more victim-centric and trauma-informed way, but still staying perpetrator-focused. But also bearing in mind that just because an offence is committed locally, there's nothing to prevent, or often very little to prevent, that person from travelling and committing an offence elsewhere.
So could you give us an example? How would this in practice look like in terms of prevention?
In terms of prevention against an individual. So when an individual has committed an offence and it is assessed by perhaps the local jurisdiction and also by Interpol that this offence is that the person is very likely to reoffend, a country may publish what they call a green notice or a green diffusion, so that if that person travels, there could be a notification at immigration, for example, when they scan their passport at an immigration desk, or if there is a criminal record check or they come into some kind of interaction with the authorities, if they check them against Interpol databases, then this green notice or this green notification will pop up. The only difference between notices and diffusions, notices are visible normally to all 196 countries, and they're often published in multiple languages. Diffusion allows a country to address the alert, it's an alert, to a specific set of countries. So that might be because if you have an offender who is known to travel to certain countries, then the country that's issuing the notification may choose to alert only those countries so that it's more focused and more targeted. So that's one mechanism we published, that it's in terms of prevention of offending, because we warn countries that someone who poses a threat is entering their jurisdiction.
Interesting. And some of the prevention initiatives in the aid sector that is more linked to a corporate prevention has adopted under new recruitments to put them under ClearCheck, which is basically a database that allows you to blacklist a perpetrator. How is Interpol different from something like ClearCheck, and how these systems complement each other?
Yeah, that's the point, is that we're trying to do exactly that, is complement the other mechanisms that exist. Interpol is definitely not trying to replace any of the very, very valuable prevention mechanisms as safeguarding mechanisms that are already out there and have been tried and tested. But we're just trying to use the tools. We have quite large databases, criminal databases, forensic databases, and we're trying to use our networks, that's those 196 countries, and put all of that at the disposal of the aid sector for the first time to address this issue. So in terms of difference to ClearCheck, of course, I would say the first main difference is that Interpol is much bigger. We have millions and millions of files that are part of the security checks that we undertake. Of course, ClearCheck, to my knowledge anyway at the moment, it's limited to UN personnel. I understand it might be expanded to implementing partners, which is good in my view. Interpol databases, we're not delineating who's on our database by who they work for or what they do. It's centered around the crime that they are alleged to have committed, or the criminal event that they've been involved in one way or another.
So there's a different phase where you can ensure prevention, right? There's at the recruitment stage, and we spoke about ClearCheck and how Interpol can complement that. And then when you have a perpetrator and you have a case, is there something that Interpol can do?
There's several things that we can do. So in terms of the employment cycle, Soteria really comes into play in two main phases of the employment cycle. I would say we're relevant for, as you said, recruitment and screening. Organizations have to sign a cooperation agreement with us to be able to share data. That's standard with Interpol in any data sharing arrangement. But an organization that has signed a cooperation agreement may send us the CV, or we have a standard referral form containing the details of the person that they're recruiting. We will conduct a search of all items that are searchable against Interpol databases, and if the organization wishes us to, within the networks of where that person has lived or resided, perhaps their nationality, to understand if there is any adverse information about that individual in any of these databases or within any of these networks. Now, we have a focus on sexual crimes. That's what we're looking for. That's what Soteria is all about. We understand that within the process, we may uncover something perhaps in another crime domain. Interpol also has a mandate to share data on that. This is essentially the process. So in terms of the recruitment cycle, at the employment stage, it's the screening, and this is something we call the threat identification scheme. It's a security check to look for something adverse in someone's history. There is a second stage where Soteria has a part to play, and that is in the disciplinary stage. So if, for example, an allegation has been made against an individual and it's been substantiated, maybe through engaging with the police, or perhaps through an internal investigation, the police don't have to have been involved, we would invite organizations to send us the details of that substantiated misconduct. We are focused on criminal misconduct. So we're really looking for those sexual misconduct allegations that have crossed a criminal threshold where the incident took place. And should that information be received at Interpol, it will be stored in a very closed database that's not visible to any member country. It's visible only to a select few of our trained criminal intelligence analysts, and we would use that data as part of the screening, as part of the threat identification scheme security check. So it's to strengthen the check with that additional misconduct data. We also will use that data to conduct criminal analysis, because what we'd like to do is understand better how this kind of incident, how this kind of offending manifests, how it is allowed to be sustained, and how it spreads, how it repeats. I know organizations find it a bit difficult. It's a bit tricky to share such sensitive data, but really we would encourage organizations to do this because we want to close the accountability gap. There is a lot of underreporting. There are, of course, the bulk of cases, police aren't aware of them, unfortunately. So we do need another resource if we're going to make the check as effective as possible.
As you mentioned, there's low levels of reporting. It's really an issue that most organizations know well. How can aid organization take allegation more seriously? And also to preface this by saying that organizations, their mandate or what they can do is through their internal administrative bodies, take administrative actions. They're not the police. What is the scope of actions that they could do to take this a bit more seriously?
Well, taking it seriously is maybe the first step, but I mean, it's a tricky one.
How does that look like?
Well,
taking it seriously.
I think in many ways, I know it's not very popular to say it, and I know there are very good reasons for not involving the police in some of these incidents. But I would say, in many incidences, someone with police training is perhaps better placed to understand at least whether a crime has occurred. So I would personally like to see police more involved, but I know that's sensitive for a lot of people. But I think that's important if we're going to address full accountability. And I think, yes, responding, probably being aware of poor behaviors, responding to allegations. I think organizations do take this very, very seriously, of course. But yes, conducting thorough, victim-centric, safe investigations.
What should organizations do when an allegation comes out unsubstantiated, which means like they were not able to find enough proofs to say that the allegations were correct? So what could organization do? It doesn't mean that this didn't happen.
Exactly.
Right?
I think that's the key point, is that, yes, just because something is unsubstantiated doesn't mean it didn't happen. We know that sexual investigations, this area is so sensitive. It is very difficult to conclude an investigation successfully. I mean, there are a lot of scenarios where this happens, where an incident happens behind closed doors with very, very few witnesses. But Interpol is in fact working with aid organizations at the moment to look at internal investigations to see if we can assist and providing training. We're doing that with partners who are also, this is their expertise. So like the CHS Alliance, organizations like Momentum. Yes, basically we're working with aid organizations to see if we can help them improve and build their own capabilities in terms of internal investigations. And really, I think it's also important to understand that as much as an allegation might talk about an incident that happened on a particular time, a particular date, there is very often lead-in things that take place. There are communications, there are behaviors, there are all kinds of things that can be identified. They're difficult to identify, but this is part of the wider story to how offending occurs and how offending takes place. So it's important maybe that organizations, when they hear about an allegation, don't focus in on that just one day, but try to look at the broader picture.
If you were to give one advice to an investigator in these type of organization, which is something that maybe you've seen yourself repeat, what would that be?
Well, again, maybe I should put this with the caveat, of course, I'm not a police officer. I work with police every day and we work in this domain. I can't replace the kind of advice that a really seasoned, well-trained investigator can provide. My main, not really piece of advice, or my main wish, let's say, is I want people to give a damn. I see and hear many, many times allegations made and brushed aside. So really give a damn, take it seriously, and give a damn about all the individuals. That also means protecting the alleged perpetrator as well. That's just as important. You need to protect them, even if they have offended, maybe to prevent them from offending again. There's lots of things you can do. But yeah, that's probably my main wish anyway, about this whole area.
You must have seen things that the average would not even be able to absorb or even, understand or even compute. When we were on our preparation interview, you mentioned you've seen forums where people share abuse tactics, like it was a recipe.
Yes.
And you've been in rooms that I think most of us wouldn't even survive emotionally. What's one thing you've seen or learned in your work that still is hard to accept?
Well, there's something that maybe I'd like to say, just to backstep a little bit. When I first joined Interpol, my first boss said to me, he just said, look, Liz, he said, in this job, you're going to see the worst of people. He said, but you're also going to see the best of people, because there are really, really amazing police officers out there all over the world doing an amazing job, often in the most difficult circumstances with very, very limited resources. and very, very difficult environments. And they're just trying to do their job, which is about protecting people and keeping them safe. And we're there trying to help them do that.
But then there must be a very dark side of humanity. And what is, one thing you're thinking, wow, this is what we could be doing as humans, and it's hard to accept.
I think, and we definitely see that here. People, unfortunately, can be incredibly inventive, sometimes inventive to be cruel. Human beings seem to have a capacity for that, and to always push the boundaries. When we're looking at criminals are often also very manipulative, very clever at getting around the system, which is why police always try to stay one step ahead. They can be stupid as well. I mean, they're the ones normally that we catch, unfortunately. It makes the work really fascinating to be part of that constant countercrime effort, let's say. But yeah, I mean, maybe understanding the capacity of humans for hurt is really quite incredible. And maybe worse than that is the capacity of humans to overlook that hurt and do nothing about it. So that's really, that's really quite hard to accept.
Yeah, I can only imagine. By staying still confidential, was there something that happened that shocked you to your core?
Yeah, I think there's a recent trend. I mean, without wanting to go into too many details, there's a very recent trend over the last 5 years of extremely violent online offending for fun. The perpetrators are often children. They do it for entertainment. Victims can be animals, people in vulnerable situations. This is a trend that really, when we discuss it, it makes me feel quite unwell. But it really is linked to this odd capacity of human beings to entertain themselves by causing harm to others, or just having no empathy. This is also a common stream among the offenders that we're looking at, is a lack of empathy for the people that they're harming. And so there are all kinds of measures at the same time to try and address that with offenders. Some offenders do want to stop. There are some amazing programs, rehabilitation programs around the world too. But yeah, that's the online offending. That this kind of offending also it comes to very often, because it's quite a recent trend. A lot of people don't know where to put it. They don't know which kind of police entity should deal with it. So often it falls in the lap of police officers that deal with online child sexual exploitation. And I've seen officers who are used to dealing with quite horrific images, videos, day in, day out. But this new trend, it really hurts them. Their well-being is deeply affected by it as the investigators. So that's also something police forces around the world have to take into consideration, is how they keep their people safe, not just the communities that they work in, but the officers doing the day job, because it can be quite hard to deal with from time to time.
It must be really tough. How do you keep going, even you in this stream of work?
Within the scope of Soteria, let's say, I'm personally very motivated. I've traveled quite a lot now with different phases of work. I've seen some pretty poor behavior, and I've seen pretty poor behavior accepted, ignored. So I'm personally very keen, having witnessed quite a lot of that, to see it addressed and to really address that accountability issue. And in the broader scheme of things, well, no, it's just there's still great work, and there's still the drive to try and find a new way to solve or support an age-old problem. So those kind of things. Other than that, I walk my dogs and, chill out. So that's about it.
Thank you, Liz. And it has been fascinating to hear you and your experience. Must be also hard to see what you see. So thank you for your work. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us.
You're very welcome. Thanks for the invitation, Guni. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. If you have any feedback or questions, feel free to reach out to us to prseah@who.int. Until the next time, goodbye.